Monaco harbor shimmered under Mediterranean sun. 30,000 faces turned toward the water, cameras tracking a white vessel as it carved impossible geometry through blue waves. Marcus Thompson stood at the helm of the Aurora Majesty, 42 years old, black hands steady on polished wood, captain's uniform crisp against shoulders that had once carried mops instead of medals. The yacht banked hard into the Sterling Spiral, a maneuver no one had executed in competition for 40 years, the kind of sailing that separated legends from everyone else who just knew how to steer. The commentator's voice crackled through speakers mounted along the harbor. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is maritime history. Captain Thompson is maintaining perfect angle at speeds that would terrify most professional sailors." The crowd roared as the Aurora Majesty completed the spiral, stopping precisely at the starting mark. Not a degree off course, not an inch out of position. Marcus cut the engines and let the silence wash over him for 3 seconds before the harbor exploded into applause. The screen froze. Split image. Left side showed Marcus in that captain's uniform, metal ribbons across his chest, commanding $90 million of engineering with the calm of someone born to it. Right side showed the same man 3 months earlier, kneeling on a yacht deck with a mop in calloused hands, coffee stains spreading across a cheap white uniform while a woman in designer shoes walked past without seeing him at all. The narrator's voice dropped to something quieter, more intimate. "This is the story of a man who saved 127 lives at sea, lost everything that mattered, and found himself again by sailing through a hurricane that should have killed him. But first, he had to remember who he was. And that began on a morning when he couldn't sleep, haunted by a face that had been asking him the same question for 5 years." The image dissolved to darkness. 3 months earlier, Chicago. Southside apartment at 3:45 in the morning. Marcus Thompson sat bolt upright in bed, heart hammering against ribs, sweat soaking through his shirt. The nightmare always came at 3 a.m., precise as a watch, faithful as grief. Devin Carter's face filled his mind, 23 years old and terrified, seawater in his lungs, 30 feet from the boat that should have saved him. "What do we do, Commander? What do we do?" The alarm screaming. The waves 40 feet high and black as oil. The rescue line tangled in debris from the fishing vessel they'd been trying to save. Devin's eyes going wide as he realized the rogue wave was coming, that there was no time, that all the training in the world couldn't stop what happened next. Man overboard. Man overboard. Marcus checked the clock. 3 hours until his shift at the marina. He wouldn't go back to sleep. He never went back to sleep after the nightmare, so he sat in the dark of his bedroom and listened to Chicago wake up outside his window. Sirens in the distance, a dog barking, the hiss of bus brakes 2 blocks away, all the sounds of a city that kept moving whether you were drowning in the past or not. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms with thin walls that let through every argument from the neighbors, a kitchen that barely fit 2 people standing. Bills covered the table in the main room. Rent $850, due 5 days ago. Utilities $180. Groceries $400, though Marcus had been stretching that by buying day-old bread and cooking beans in bulk. Bank statement showed $247, which meant he was short again, which meant he'd have to ask for an advance on next week's paycheck. A photo sat on the dresser. Kesha, beautiful in a way that still stopped his breath 3 years after cancer had taken her. She was laughing in the picture, head thrown back, one hand on Marcus's chest, both of them wearing their best clothes for a wedding they'd attended the month before the diagnosis. Marcus in his Coast Guard dress whites, medals pinned to his chest from 15 years of rescues, of bringing people home alive from water that wanted them dead. Keisha had been so proud that day, kept touching the medals like they were made of something more valuable than metal and ribbon. "You were born for the water, baby. Don't you ever forget that." But he had forgotten. or maybe forced himself to forget, which was a different kind of drowning. A white envelope sat in the dresser's top drawer, Keisha's handwriting on the front in blue ink. For Marcus, when you're ready. He'd found it 2 days after her funeral, tucked between folded sweaters that still smelled like her perfume. 3 years later, he still hadn't opened it. Every morning, he looked at that envelope. Every morning, he closed the drawer without touching it. Isaiah woke at 6:30 with the sudden energy of a 7-year-old who hadn't learned yet that the world was something you had to brace yourself against. He came padding into the kitchen with his stuffed whale under one arm, gap-toothed smile wide, hair sticking up in directions that defied physics. "Dad, can we make pancakes?" Marcus knelt down to eye level with his son, smoothing down that impossible hair. "How about eggs? We're low on flour until Friday." Isaiah's face fell for just a second before he rallied, the way kids do when they're trying to be brave about disappointment. "Eggs are good. Can I scramble them? You can try. But remember what happened last time. I only broke 3 on the floor. That's 2 more than we can afford to break today, buddy." They worked together in the narrow kitchen, Isaiah standing on a stool to reach the stove, Marcus guiding his hands without taking over. The eggs came out uneven, some parts runny and some parts rubber, but Isaiah beamed with pride as he scooped them onto plates. They ate standing up because the table was covered with bills Marcus hadn't figured out how to pay yet. Isaiah swung his legs from the stool, fork in hand, suddenly serious in the way children get when they're about to ask something they've been thinking about for a while. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson showed us pictures of ship captains at school yesterday. She said they're heroes who save people." Marcus's throat tightened. He kept his eyes on his plate. "That's nice, buddy. Were you ever a captain?" The question hit like a fist to the sternum. Marcus set down his fork slowly, buying seconds to figure out how to answer. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you always look at the water when we go to the park. Mom used to say you looked at it like you were missing something. She said you used to sail before I was born, before everything got sad." Marcus closed his eyes. Kesha had told their son things before she died, planted seeds that were only now starting to sprout. "That was a long time ago, Isaiah. Different life, but you could captain a ship again, right? If you wanted to?" Marcus looked at his son, 7 years old, everything ahead of him, everything to lose. Some doors close for good reasons. Now finish your eggs before they get cold. Isaiah's face showed confusion, hurt, questions he didn't know how to ask. But he was 7, and 7-year-olds were easily distracted by the immediate needs of getting ready for school. The moment passed. Marcus helped him brush his teeth and pack his backpack, triple-checking that the math homework was inside because Isaiah had forgotten it twice last week. Mrs. Robinson arrived at 7:15, the neighbor from down the hall who watched Isaiah while Marcus worked. She was 60-something with kind eyes and hands that had raised 4 children of her own. She saw the bills on the table, saw the tension in Marcus's shoulders, saw too much because she'd known him since he moved in 3 years ago with a dying wife and a 4-year-old son, and nothing else. "Marcus, if you need help, we're fine. Thank you, Mrs. Robinson." She glanced at the dresser, at the white envelope Marcus knew was visible through the crack in the drawer he'd forgotten to close all the way. "You going to read Keisha's letter someday?" "Someday. Not today. That boy loves you more than life itself. You know that?" Marcus looked at Isaiah, who was showing Mrs. Robinson a drawing he'd made of a whale. "That's why I do this. Why I take what the world gives me and don't complain." Mrs. Robinson's expression said she had opinions about that, but she kept them to herself. She'd learned over 3 years that Marcus Thompson didn't accept help easily, didn't accept much of anything except the paycheck that kept him and Isaiah housed and fed. The Red Line train to Lakefront Marina was packed with morning commuters, everyone carefully not looking at each other, locked in their phones or their exhaustion. Marcus stood near the door in his thrift store jacket, carrying a mop bucket that marked him as service industry, as someone beneath the notice of the men in suits and women in business casual. No one saw him. He'd perfected the art of being invisible over 3 years of scrubbing toilets on yachts that cost more than he'd make in 10 lifetimes. The train passed 3 yacht captains in crisp white uniforms heading toward the same marina, laughing about something, coffee cups in hand. The ease of men who'd never had to choose between electricity and groceries. They didn't acknowledge Marcus's existence even when he stood 3 feet away. He was furniture. He was the help. He was nobody. The Aurora Majesty occupied the most exclusive berth at Chicago's lakefront marina. $90 million of precision engineering, 200 feet of gleaming white hull and polished chrome. Marcus knew every inch of her. Every corridor, every bathroom, every stateroom where deals worth millions got signed while he emptied trash cans 3 feet away. He'd spent 3 years making himself invisible on this yacht, learning her rhythms and her secrets while the people who owned her walked past without seeing him at all. Tom Morrison was already on deck when Marcus arrived, 64 years old with hands like leather and eyes that had spent 40 years watching the water. Former captain, now working maintenance because retirement had bored him and because he still loved the smell of salt and diesel in the morning. He looked up from the rope he was coiling and studied Marcus in a way that made Marcus uncomfortable. "Morning, Marcus." "Morning, Tom. You sleep last night?" "Same as always." Tom grunted, which meant he knew the answer was no. He'd served in the Navy, lost friends in the water, recognized the particular exhaustion that came from nightmares you couldn't outrun. "You adjusted that port stabilizer yesterday?" Compensator was 3 degrees off. Hull wouldn't track straight in crosswind. Tom's eyebrows went up. "How'd you know that?" "Felt it when the wind shifted." "That's captain-level observation, Marcus." "Just doing my job." Tom set down the rope and moved closer, voice dropping so the other crew members wouldn't hear. "I've worked with captains 40 years, real ones. I know what they look like, how they move, how they carry themselves." Marcus picked up his mop, dipped it in the bucket. "I need to get the main deck cleaned before the executives arrive. You walk like a captain. You look at this yacht like a captain. Hell, I've seen you watching her leave harbor like a man watching his first love sail away. I'm a deckhand. You're a deckhand now." Tom stepped closer. "That's not what you are." Marcus's hands tightened on the mop handle. "My shift ends at 6. Isaiah's waiting." He walked away before Tom could push further, before the questions could crack open things Marcus had spent 5 years keeping sealed. The main deck needed mopping. The brass fixtures needed polishing. The toilets in the guest suites needed scrubbing. The work was mindless and repetitive and safe, which was exactly what Marcus needed. No one could drown mopping a floor. No one could die because you polished chrome instead of saving their life. The coffee hit Marcus square in the chest at 9:15, hot and black, spreading through his white uniform like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there with the mop in his hand while Priscilla Davenport walked past without looking up from her phone. The coffee dripped down his shirt onto the deck he'd spent the last hour cleaning. "You missed a spot." Priscilla's voice was distracted, bored. "Get someone to clean this up. I need another coffee." Marcus stared at the back of her head. 3 years. Over 1,000 days of being invisible, of being nothing, of swallowing rage and humiliation because Isaiah needed to eat and the rent came due every month whether you had dignity or not. "Yes, ma'am." He bent down and started mopping again. Same deck, same stain, same silence that followed him everywhere on this vessel like a ghost that had learned his name. Tom Morrison witnessed the whole thing from the supply closet doorway, fury building in weathered features. He waited until Marcus came to change his shirt before saying anything, but his voice was tight when he spoke. "4th time this month, Priscilla." "It's fine, Tom." "That's the 4th time this month, Marcus." Marcus pulled off the stained shirt, balled it up. I said, "It's fine." Tom leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, studying Marcus with an intensity that made it hard to maintain the carefully constructed walls. "I know what captains look like, how they move, how they watch the water. You walk like a captain, Marcus. You look at this yacht like a captain. Hell, you navigate around this vessel like you're checking systems instead of cleaning them." Marcus's hands stopped on the buttons of his fresh uniform. "I'm a deckhand." "You're a deckhand now." Tom pushed off the doorframe. "That's not what you are." Marcus finished buttoning his shirt in silence. He picked up his mop and walked past Tom without meeting his eyes, because if he met them, he might crack. And if he cracked, then 5 years of careful invisibility would shatter, and he'd have to face the fact that he'd been hiding not from the world, but from himself. The afternoon passed in the usual rhythms of servitude. Marcus mopped decks and cleaned bathrooms and emptied trash while executives discussed deals in voices that suggested money was infinite and people like him were replaceable. Victoria Ashford appeared twice, the VP of Operations, 50 years old with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. She looked at Marcus the way someone might look at a stain they expected someone else to handle. The second time she walked past, she stopped, turned, studied Marcus with an expression that suggested she was deciding whether he was worth the oxygen. The help needs to maintain appropriate appearance at all times. Standards matter on this vessel. Marcus kept his eyes down. "Yes, ma'am. See that you remember it." She walked away, heels clicking on the deck like a countdown to something Marcus couldn't name. Tom watched the whole interaction with jaw clenched, hands curled into fists, but he said nothing. What was there to say? This was how the world worked. People like Victoria gave orders. People like Marcus followed them. That was the agreement, spoken or not. Marcus left the marina at 6:03, 3 minutes late, which meant he had to run to catch the red line that would get him home in time to relieve Mrs. Robinson. He made it with seconds to spare, squeezing through closing doors, breathing hard, aware that he smelled like cleaning chemicals and the particular kind of sweat that came from swallowing your pride all day. Isaiah launched himself at Marcus's legs the moment he walked through the apartment door. "Dad! Dad! We learned about boats today." Mrs. Robinson smiled from the couch where she'd been helping Isaiah with homework. "He's been talking about it non-stop since I picked him up from school." Marcus lifted Isaiah up, held him close, let the weight of the day fall away for just a moment. "Yeah? What did you learn?" Mrs. Patterson showed us pictures, big ones. She said ship captains are heroes. Isaiah's face went serious, the way it did when he was working up to something important. "Were you ever a captain, Dad?" The question hit harder the second time. Marcus looked at Mrs. Robinson, who had the grace to busy herself collecting her things. He looked at his son, 7 years old, gap-toothed and innocent, asking questions that cracked foundations. "That was a long time ago, buddy. Different life, but you could captain again, right? If you wanted to?" Marcus set Isaiah down, knelt to his level. "Some doors close for good reasons, Isaiah. Now come on, let's make spaghetti." Isaiah's face lit up, questions forgotten in the immediate joy of his favorite meal. Marcus stood and caught Mrs. Robinson's expression before she left, something sad and knowing that said she understood exactly what he was doing and didn't approve but wouldn't interfere because Isaiah was fed and housed and loved, which was more than a lot of kids had. They made spaghetti together, sauce from a jar Marcus stretched with extra water and seasonings, pasta that stuck together because Isaiah kept stirring it even after Marcus told him to stop. They ate at the small table after Marcus cleared the bills, Isaiah chattering about school and whales and a kid named Tommy who'd said something mean at recess. Marcus listened with half his attention while the other half cataloged what needed paying, what could wait, which utility company would accept another late payment before they cut service. After dinner, after Isaiah's bath, after the bedtime story about whales that Isaiah had Marcus read twice, Marcus stood in the doorway of his son's room and watched him sleep. The stuffed whale was tucked under Isaiah's arm, his breathing slow and even, his face peaceful in a way that made Marcus's chest ache. This was why he did it. Why he mopped floors and swallowed humiliation and made himself invisible. This boy. This perfect, innocent boy who deserved better than a father who'd forgotten how to be anything except afraid. Marcus walked back to his own room and opened the dresser drawer. The white envelope sat there, Keisha's handwriting patient and waiting. For Marcus, when you're ready. He stared at it for 60 seconds by the clock on his nightstand. Then he closed the drawer without touching it because he wasn't ready. He might never be ready. And that was fine. That was the deal he'd made with the universe. Keep Isaiah safe. Keep moving forward. Don't look back at what you used to be. The nightmare came at 3 a.m., precise as always. Devon's face, terrified and young, asking the question Marcus could never answer. What do we do, Commander? The alarm. The waves. The body disappearing into black water while Marcus screamed orders that came too late to matter. He woke with his heart trying to break through his ribs. 3 hours until his shift. He didn't go back to sleep. The call came at 5 a.m. on a Thursday morning, shattering what passed for peace in Marcus's carefully managed existence. He was already awake, sitting in the dark of his kitchen with instant coffee that tasted like regret when his phone buzzed with Tom Morrison's number. Marcus almost didn't answer because 5 a.m. calls were never good news. Get to the marina. Now. Something's happening. Tom's voice had an edge Marcus hadn't heard before, urgent and rough. Marcus was moving before he'd fully processed the words, pulling on his uniform, leaving a note for Mrs. Robinson who'd be arriving in 2 hours, Isaiah still asleep with his wail and his innocence. The red line wasn't running yet, so Marcus called a rideshare he couldn't afford, watching the fare tick up on his phone while the driver navigated empty streets. Chicago at dawn was beautiful in a way Marcus had forgotten how to appreciate. All amber streetlights and gray sky, the city holding its breath before the chaos of daytime. The marina was ablaze with lights when Marcus arrived. The Aurora Majesty sat at her berth looking somehow urgent, as if $90 million of engineering could sense that something important was about to happen. Tom met him at the gangway, face drawn with worry. Vanessa Sterling just arrived. Her mother's in Nassau, cardiac surgery, complications. She needs to get there in 12 hours. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Okay, so call a captain. That's the problem. Tom's expression was grim. Hurricane Catherine is tracking toward the Bahamas. Category 2. Every captain within 500 miles is refusing the crossing. Marcus looked past Tom to where he could see movement on the yacht, hear raised voices, sense the particular kind of panic that came when money couldn't solve a problem. Not my concern. I'm here to clean. Tom grabbed his arm. Marcus, listen to me. I've known you 3 years. I know you're hiding something, and I know it's eating you alive. Whatever happened, whatever made you stop sailing, I never said I used to sail. You didn't have to. Tom's grip tightened. I've watched you for 3 years. The way you move around this yacht. The way you check wind direction without thinking. The way your eyes track other vessels in the harbor. You're not a deckhand, Marcus. You're a captain pretending to be one. And right now, Vanessa Sterling needs a captain who's brave enough to sail through hell. Marcus pulled his arm free. I have a son. I have bills. I have a job that keeps us fed and housed. That's all that matters. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you're already dead. You're just going through the motions until Isaiah grows up and realizes his father gave up on everything he used to be. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus stepped back, rage and shame burning in his chest. But before he could respond, chaos erupted from the yacht. Vanessa Sterling burst through the gangway like a hurricane made flesh. 43 years old in a navy blazer with her phone pressed to her ear and 2 assistants scrambling behind her. Her voice cracked in a way Marcus had never heard, the CEO facade breaking. What do you mean, unconscious? When? How bad? Marcus watched from 30 feet away, mop bucket in his hand even though he hadn't meant to pick it up. Vanessa ended the call and threw the phone at her assistant. "Get me a captain, now! I need to be in Nassau in 12 hours. Priscilla's fingers flew across her tablet. Captain Reynolds is in Monaco. Henderson is in Miami on another charter. Martinez is on medical leave. I don't want excuses. I want a captain. Ma'am, there's a Category 2 hurricane tracking toward the Bahamas. Most captains are refusing the crossing. The weather— My mother is dying." The words cut through the marina like a blade. Vanessa's composure shattered right there in front of everyone, her voice breaking on the last syllable. She pressed her hand against her mouth and turned away, and Marcus saw something he'd never seen before. Vanessa Sterling as a human being instead of a title and a paycheck. Priscilla made call after call. Each one ended the same way. Unavailable. Booked. Can't make the crossing today. Sorry, the weather's too dangerous. 8 calls, 8 refusals. The desperation in Vanessa's face grew with each rejection until she looked like she might break apart right there on the dock. There has to be someone. Anyone. Priscilla looked at her tablet, then at Vanessa, face pale. "Ma'am, there's no one. Every qualified captain within 500 miles is either committed or refusing the voyage because of the hurricane." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Marcus should have kept mopping, should have stayed invisible, should have remembered the promise he'd made to himself 5 years ago when he buried Keisha next to the piece of his soul that had drowned with Devon Carter. But his mouth opened before his brain could stop it, and the words came out clear and certain. "I can get you there." Time seemed to stop. Every head turned. Priscilla's expression went from desperate to disbelieving in half a second. She actually laughed, sharp and ugly, the kind of laugh designed to wound. "Excuse me?" Marcus stepped forward, set down the mop with deliberate care. "I can get you there. The Aurora Majesty. I can captain her to Nassau." The laughter exploded like someone had told the funniest joke in history. Priscilla doubled over. Rachel, the stewardess, covered her mouth with both hands. Even the security officer at the gangway cracked a smile. The deckhand wants to captain a $90 million yacht. This was comedy. This was entertainment. This was the help for getting their place. Vanessa approached slowly, heels clicking against the dock like a countdown. She stopped 3 feet away and scanned Marcus head to toe, taking in the worn shoes and calloused hands and cheap uniform that smelled like cleaning chemicals. Her eyes were cold and calculating, the CEO returning now that the initial panic had passed. "What's your name?" "Marcus Thompson." She repeated it slowly, as if testing how it sounded. "Marcus Thompson. And where exactly did you learn to captain a vessel like this?" "United States Coast Guard, ma'am. 15 years. Lieutenant Commander." The laughter stopped. Just stopped, like someone had cut the power. Priscilla's smile froze on her face. Rachel straightened up. The entire dock went silent except for the sound of water lapping against hulls and the distant cry of gulls overhead. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Lieutenant Commander, you're telling me a former Coast Guard officer is mopping decks on my yacht?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Marcus didn't answer because the truth was too heavy, too raw, too soaked in salt water and screaming, and a 23-year-old's body disappearing 30 feet from the boat that should have saved him. The truth was Devon's face asking what to do, and Keisha's hand growing cold in his, and 5 years of choosing invisibility because being nothing was safer than being the man who'd failed when it mattered most. Vanessa studied his face, looking for the lie, looking for the crack that would prove this was some elaborate joke. She found neither, and something shifted in her expression. "Let me make you an offer, Marcus Thompson." She stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell her perfume, expensive and sharp, like everything about her. "Captain this yacht to Nassau. Get me there safely." She paused, and Marcus knew what was coming before the words left her mouth, because he'd learned in 3 years how people like Vanessa Sterling operated. They had their fun at the expense of people like him. They made their jokes. They reminded you of your place in the hierarchy with cruelty dressed up as humor. And I'll marry you. The explosion of laughter was louder this time. Priscilla actually had to lean against the rail. Rachel doubled over. The security officer was openly grinning now. The joke spread through the marina like wildfire. The deckhand and the CEO, the mop pusher proposing to the billionaire heiress. Comedy gold. Entertainment for people who'd never had to choose between dignity and survival. Marcus stood perfectly still while humiliation burned through his chest. This was what he got for speaking up. This was what happened when you forgot your place. The familiar heat of being dismissed, of being nothing, of being invisible, even when standing right in front of someone who should see you. Vanessa's smile widened, cold and triumphant. "Well, what do you say, Captain?" She said the word captain like it was a curse, like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. And something inside Marcus shifted. Something he'd buried 5 years ago when Devon drowned, and then again when Keisha died, and he was left alone with a 4-year-old son and nothing but grief and bills, and the weight of being the man who couldn't save anyone. Devon's voice echoed in his mind, not panicked now but curious, the way it had sounded during training before everything went wrong. "What do we do, Commander?" For the first time in 5 years, Marcus had an answer. "I say we stop wasting time. Your mother's waiting." He turned and walked toward the bridge. Behind him, Priscilla's voice rose to a shriek. "Security! Someone stop him! He's delusional!" Tom Morrison stepped in front of the security officer, blocked his path with crossed arms and 40 years of nautical authority. "Let him go. Tom, he's a deckhand. I know exactly what he is." Tom's voice was steady, certain. "And I'm telling you, let him go." Vanessa watched the exchange, face unreadable, calculating odds and risks and the very real possibility that her mother might die while she stood on a dock arguing with the help. "Ma'am," Priscilla pleaded, "get my bag." "What?" "My overnight bag. Get it now." Priscilla's jaw dropped. "You can't seriously be considering that's an order." Marcus climbed the stairs to the bridge on legs that felt strange, heavy, like walking through water. 5 years. 5 years since he'd touched a helm. 5 years since Devon. The bridge door stood open. The captain's chair waited, leather and pristine, exactly like 1,000 helms he'd commanded before the world taught him that competence wasn't enough to save people you loved. He lowered himself into the seat. His hands trembled. Then they stopped. Muscle memory took over, older and deeper than trauma, written into his body by 15 years of training and 437 rescue missions. His fingers found the master switch, the navigation systems, the engine controls. Each movement precise, automatic, like riding a bicycle or breathing or remembering who you used to be before grief convinced you to become someone smaller. The instruments came alive. Lights blinked on. Gauges stabilized. The Aurora Majesty hummed beneath him. $90 million of engineering responding to hands that knew exactly how to wake her up and make her sing. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, face pale, eyes wide with something that might have been fear, or respect, or the dawning realization that maybe, possibly, the man she'd just publicly humiliated actually knew what he was doing. "You actually know what you're doing." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." She moved to the passenger seating behind the helm, sat down. The seatbelt clicked. "If you sink my yacht, I'll sue you for 3 lifetimes. "Understood." Marcus reached for the radio. His voice came out different, formal and professional. The voice of a man who used to command the sea before it taught him that commanding wasn't enough. "Chicago Marina, this is Aurora Majesty, requesting immediate departure clearance. Destination Nassau, Bahamas. Priority medical emergency." Silence crackled on the radio. Then, "Aurora Majesty, say again. Captain identification, please." Marcus paused. For 5 years he'd been nobody, a ghost, a shadow mopping decks on a yacht full of people who never saw him. But not today. Not anymore. The words came easier than he'd expected. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thompson, Coast Guard retired. Master Mariner certification. Alpha, Charlie 447, 1. Another pause. Longer this time. While someone somewhere checked records and made decisions. Marcus waited, hands resting on the throttle, heart surprisingly steady. Behind him, Vanessa watched through the glass, and he could feel her reassessing everything she thought she knew about the man who'd spent 3 years invisible in her employ. Aurora Majesty. Stand by for verification. 30 seconds passed. 45. A full minute. Marcus kept his breathing even and his hands steady and his eyes on the instruments that would carry them 1,200 miles through water that might kill them both if he made even one mistake. Aurora Majesty, you are cleared for departure. Be advised, NOAA is reporting deteriorating conditions along your route. Hurricane Catherine tracking northeast. Recommend extreme caution. Roger, Chicago. Aurora Majesty departing. Marcus engaged the engines. The yacht hummed to life beneath him, power thrumming through the deck plates, responsive and eager. He'd forgotten this feeling, or tried to forget it, but his body remembered. His hands remembered. Some part of him that had been sleeping for 5 years woke up and recognized home. Priscilla stood on the dock with her phone in her hand and her mouth open. Tom Morrison watched from the gangway with arms crossed and a small smile on his weathered face. The yacht began to move, slowly at first, and then faster, and the marina fell away behind them. Open water waited ahead, gray and vast, and for the first time in 5 years, Marcus Thompson was sailing. Lake Michigan stretched before them like hammered steel under morning clouds, Chicago's skyline shrinking to miniature behind the Aurora Majesty's wake. Marcus set the initial heading south by southwest, checking instruments that responded with the fluency of old friends. Everything was perfect. His hands weren't shaking anymore. His breathing had settled into the rhythm of waves and engine hum. His mind was clear for the first time since Devon Carter's body had disappeared beneath black water 30 feet from salvation. This was where he belonged. He'd forgotten that. Or maybe forced himself to forget because remembering hurt worse than pretending he'd never been the kind of man who could navigate by stars and instinct when every machine failed. But the yacht remembered for him, responding to corrections he made without conscious thought, reading his intentions through subtle pressure on the wheel. Vanessa unbuckled after 20 minutes, stood, moved to the bridge doorway. Marcus kept his eyes forward. You should stay seated, ma'am. We might hit rough water when we reach the river system. I've been on 100 voyages. I'll risk it. She stepped onto the bridge proper, stood beside the first officer's chair but didn't sit. Her posture was different now, less CEO and more daughter racing toward a mother who might not survive the day. The vulnerability Marcus had glimpsed on the dock was still there beneath her designer armor. How long were you in the Coast Guard? 15 years. Rescue operations. 8 years at Cape Hatteras before that Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane response mostly. Vanessa processed this, and Marcus could feel her reassessing him with every second that passed. Why did you stop? The question cut deeper than she could know. Marcus's jaw tightened. Things change. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She was quiet for a long moment, studying his profile while he pretended to focus entirely on the navigation display. Then she sat carefully in the first officer's chair, as if the leather might burn her. My father was a captain. Marcus glanced at her for the first time since they'd left the dock. Commanded vessels for 40 years. Started as a deck officer on cargo ships, worked his way to admiral in the Naval Reserve. Built Sterling Maritime when he retired. She paused, and something bitter crept into her voice. Handed it to me 5 years ago. We haven't spoken since. Why not? because I changed things. Modernized the fleet, adjusted our routes, made decisions he thought betrayed everything he'd built. Her fingers curled against the armrest. He called me ungrateful, said I was destroying his legacy. Were you? Vanessa turned to him, surprise flickering across features that usually broadcast control. No, I was saving it. The maritime industry was shifting. Fuel costs were killing us, and he wanted to operate like it was still 1980. I made the hard choices he couldn't. Marcus nodded, keeping his opinion to himself, because he'd learned in 3 years that rich people's family problems were a minefield he had no business entering. But Vanessa wasn't finished. He'll be there. My father, at the hospital in Nassau. First time I'll see him in 5 years, and it'll be because my mother might die. She won't. You don't know that. No. Marcus checked the navigation display, made a minor correction to their heading. But I know something about waiting too long to see someone, and I know the universe sometimes gives us chances we don't deserve. Vanessa stared at him, and the silence stretched until Marcus thought maybe he'd said too much, revealed too much about the letter he wouldn't read, and the father-son conversations he kept cutting short. Then her voice came quieter, stripped of its sharp edges. That's a strange thing for a deckhand to say. I'm not a deckhand right now. No. Her voice softened further. I suppose you're not. They sailed in silence for the next hour, and it was the kind of silence that felt comfortable instead of awkward. Two people who'd started the day as employer and employee slowly becoming something else. The Illinois River system opened before them, industrial and muddy, nothing like the pristine waters Marcus had navigated during rescue operations. But water was water, and current was current, and his hands remembered how to read both. The weather reports started coming in around noon. Marcus had been checking them obsessively since they left Chicago, watching Hurricane Catherine's projected path shift in ways that made his stomach tighten. Category 2 with winds up to 100 miles per hour, tracking northeast but with enough uncertainty in the models that she could swing west and put them directly in her path. Vanessa brought him coffee at 1. Actual good coffee, instead of the instant garbage Marcus usually drank. She'd found it somewhere in the yacht's galley, probably made by a machine that cost more than his monthly rent. He took it with thanks that felt inadequate. Tell me about your son. The shift in topic caught Marcus off guard. He's 7. Smart. Asks too many questions. What kind of questions? The kind I don't know how to answer. Marcus wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, grateful for something to hold. He wants to know if I used to be a captain. Wants to know why I look at the water the way I do. His teacher told them ship captains are heroes, and now he's got ideas. Does he know? About your past? Marcus shook his head. He knows I work on boats. That's it. Why haven't you told him? Because if he knew, he'd want me to do it again. He'd want his dad to be a captain, and I wasn't ready to explain why I couldn't. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, then spoke with surprising gentleness. Maybe it's time to show him, instead of explaining. Marcus looked at her, this woman who'd mocked him 6 hours ago and was now offering something that felt like understanding. What do you mean? I mean you're captaining a $90 million yacht through hurricane conditions to save a stranger's life. That's not nothing, Marcus. That's everything. Before Marcus could respond, the radio crackled to life. Aurora Majesty, this is Coast Guard Station Key West. Be advised, Hurricane Catherine has accelerated. Current position 200 miles east of your route. Conditions deteriorating rapidly. Recommend immediate course change or return to port. Marcus grabbed the mic, muscle memory from 15 years making his response crisp and professional. Coast Guard Key West, this is Aurora Majesty. We have a medical emergency, patient critical in Nassau. Requesting updated weather window. Static filled the bridge for 5 seconds that felt like 5 minutes. Then, Aurora Majesty, we're showing a narrow window approximately 6 hours before outer bands reach your position. Recommend maximum speed if you're continuing. Marcus looked at Vanessa. Your call. She didn't hesitate. My mother's waiting. He keyed the mic. Coast Guard Key West, Aurora Majesty continuing to Nassau. Request continuous position monitoring. Roger, Aurora Majesty. Godspeed, Captain. Marcus pushed the throttles forward. The engines responded with a roar that vibrated through the deck plates, and the Aurora Majesty surged through darkening water like she understood the stakes. Somewhere ahead, 200 miles east and closing, Hurricane Catherine was accelerating. They had 6 hours, maybe less if the storm shifted west. Tell me about him, the one you lost. Vanessa's question came an hour later when they'd cleared the river systems and entered the Gulf of Mexico proper. The sky ahead was bruised purple and gray, and the waves had grown from gentle swells to something with teeth. Marcus didn't want to talk about Devon. He'd spent 5 years not talking about Devon, building walls around the memory until it became a nightmare that only visited at 3 a.m. when his defenses were down. But Vanessa was sitting there waiting, and they had hours ahead of them with nothing but water and wind and the growing certainty that this voyage was going to test every skill Marcus had tried to forget. So he told her. Ensign Devon Carter, 23 years old, first deployment under my command. His hands tightened on the wheel as the memories flooded back sharper than they'd been in months. Eager kid, talented, reminded me of myself at that age. We were running a night rescue operation, fishing vessel taking on water in a storm off Cape Hatteras. Standard situation. We'd done it 100 times. Marcus's voice flattened into something mechanical, the only way he could get through the story without breaking. Devon was our rescue swimmer. Best I'd ever seen. Young but fearless, the kind of sailor who made you believe the Coast Guard's motto about having to go out but not having to come back was just dramatic posturing, because of course everyone came back if you did your job right. I gave the order to deploy. He went into the water. The pause stretched until Vanessa prompted him gently. What happened? Rogue wave hit the fishing vessel. Debris everywhere, wooden planks, netting, a diesel drum that cracked open and made the water slick. The line tangled in the debris field, and Devon was attached to that line. And Marcus had given the order to deploy, even though the weather was marginal and the fishing vessel was taking on water faster than their models predicted. By the time we got to him, Marcus stopped because his throat had closed and his vision had blurred, and he was back there on the deck of the cutter with Devon's body on the planks and the medic shaking his head, and the absolute certainty that Marcus Thompson had just killed a 23-year-old kid by making the wrong call. He drowned, 30 feet from the boat. I watched it happen. The bridge felt smaller, the air thinner, compressed by grief that hadn't faded even slightly in 5 years. Vanessa didn't speak, and Marcus was grateful because platitudes would have shattered something in him that was barely holding together. Investigation cleared me. Equipment failure, weather conditions beyond prediction. Nothing I could have done differently. They offered me my command back, promotion, commendations. Everything the Coast Guard gives you when they need you to keep sailing because the ocean doesn't care about your trauma, and neither can they. But you didn't take it. How could I? Every time I looked at water, I saw his face. Every time I touched a helm, I heard him asking what to do. Like I had the answer. Like I could save him. Marcus's voice cracked for the first time. I couldn't sail anymore, so I stopped. Vanessa absorbed this, and when she spoke, her voice carried a different kind of pain. And your wife? Keisha. Met her in college. She was studying education, wanted to teach 3rd grade because she loved kids more than anything in the world. We got married a year after I joined the Coast Guard, and she followed me to every duty station without complaining, even though it meant giving up jobs she loved. The familiar knife twisted in Marcus's chest. Cancer. 3 years ago. Started in her lungs, spread everywhere before we caught it. I took leave from the Coast Guard, held her hand for 6 months while she faded. She died 2 weeks after Isaiah's 4th birthday, and I was still trying to figure out how to explain death to a kid who thought his mom was just sleeping a lot. So you lost your ensign, then your wife, and then I had a son to raise alone on a deckhand's salary because I couldn't get back on the water. Marcus's voice was flat now, emptied of everything except fact. Sold our house, moved to Chicago because it was cheap and far from anything that reminded me of who I used to be. Got the job at Sterling Maritime because they needed someone willing to work for minimum wage and not ask questions. Vanessa leaned back in her chair and let out a long breath. And I made a joke about marrying you. It was funny. It wasn't. Her voice was tight with something that might have been shame. It was cruel. And I'm sorry. Marcus looked at her then. Really looked. Seeing past the CEO and the designer clothes and the wealth that insulated her from consequences. He saw a daughter racing toward a dying mother, a woman estranged from her father, someone carrying weight that money couldn't lift. Apology accepted. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that they were both wounded people trying to stay upright, both carrying losses that had changed them into versions of themselves they hadn't planned to become. It wasn't romance yet. That would come later, in Monaco, under very different circumstances. But it was the foundation of understanding that made romance possible. The first bands of Hurricane Catherine hit 6 hours later, exactly when the Coast Guard said they would. The sky had gone from bruised purple to absolute black, and the rain came sideways with enough force to strip paint. Marcus had been through hurricanes before, more than he could count, but sitting in the captain's chair after 5 years away felt like learning to walk again while someone was trying to knock you down. I need you to go below. Strap in. It's going to get rough. Vanessa shook her head, and there was steel in her voice that reminded Marcus she'd built an entire maritime company in her father's shadow. I'm not leaving you alone up here. I've done this before. So have I. My father took me through a storm when I was 16, made me stand watch while he navigated. I know what this is. Marcus wanted to argue, but a wave hit the bow and the yacht lurched hard enough that arguing became a luxury they couldn't afford. Then, hold on. The next 4 hours tested everything Marcus thought he'd lost. 40-foot swells that made the Aurora Majesty feel like a toy. Zero visibility beyond 10 feet, just gray water and grayer sky blending into each other. Wind gusting to 60 knots, sometimes higher, trying to push them off course with every gust. The yacht was built for this. State-of-the-art stabilizers, reinforced hull, navigation equipment that cost more than most houses, but none of that mattered if the captain couldn't hold her together. Marcus fought the wheel with hands that remembered this dance, correcting for waves before they hit, reading the ocean's rhythm through decades of training. The navigation system flickered once, twice, then died completely. GPS offline, radar flatlined, autopilot unresponsive. Every electronic instrument failed simultaneously in a cascade that would have panicked most captains. Marcus switched to manual without missing a beat. He pulled out paper charts from the storage locker beneath the console, spreading them across the navigation table with the ease of someone who'd done this when the technology failed on a cutter in the North Atlantic, during a rescue that should have killed everyone aboard. His hands moved across the charts, plotting positions, calculating drift, using every manual technique sailors had employed for centuries before GPS convinced everyone the old ways were obsolete. Vanessa watched him work with something like awe in her eyes. You're navigating by dead reckoning, and celestial when we get a break in the clouds. Marcus didn't look up from the charts. Estimating our position based on last known heading and speed, factoring in wind drift and current. It's not perfect, but it'll get us close enough. How did you learn this? Coast Guard Academy, then 20 years of practice. They make you learn the old ways first, before they let you touch the computer. His pencil moved across the chart, marking their estimated position. My instructor said technology is a crutch that breaks when you need it most. Never trusted anything I couldn't do with a compass and a sextant. Another wave hit, bigger than the others, and the yacht rolled hard to starboard. Something crashed in the galley below. Vanessa's knuckles went white on the armrests, but she didn't make a sound. Marcus corrected smoothly, his body anticipating the motion before his mind processed it, and the Aurora Majesty responded like she'd been waiting. 5 years for hands that knew how to ask instead of demand. Devon's voice came to him then, not panicked this time, but curious, the way it had sounded during training when they'd run scenarios about impossible situations. "What do we do, Commander?" Marcus spoke out loud without meaning to. "We sail through it. That's what we do." Vanessa heard him but didn't ask who he was talking to. She understood, maybe, that everyone who'd spent time on the water carried ghosts, and the smart ones learned to sail with them instead of running away. How much longer? Marcus checked their position on the chart, cross-referenced it with the compass bearing and the angle of the waves. 2 hours. Maybe less if the wind shifts in our favor. Can we make it? He looked at her then. This woman who'd mocked him 8 hours ago and was now trusting him with her life and her mother's last chance. Yes, we're going to make it. The certainty in his voice surprised him, but it was true. They were going to make it because Marcus Thompson had spent 15 years learning how to bring people home alive from water that wanted them dead, and 5 years of mopping floors hadn't erased muscle memory written into his bones by 437 rescue missions. The lights of Nassau appeared through the rain like ghosts at first, barely visible through the sheets of water hammering the windscreen. Then clearer, sharper, real, and waiting. Marcus's arms burned from hours of fighting the wheel. His vision had narrowed from exhaustion and adrenaline crash. But the lights were there, solid and true, and Vanessa made a sound that might have been a sob, or a laugh, or both. "I see it. Marcus, I see it." "Harbor Control, this is Aurora Majesty requesting emergency docking. Medical situation, repeat, medical emergency." The radio crackled. "Aurora Majesty, we have you on radar. You're cleared for Pier 7, medical transport standing by." That was one hell of a crossing, Captain. Marcus didn't respond because he was too busy threading the needle, guiding $90 million of yacht through a channel designed for calm weather, while Hurricane Catherine's outer bands tried to shove them onto rocks that would tear the hull apart. But his hands knew what to do. His body knew. Some part of him that had been sleeping for 5 years was fully awake now, and remembered exactly how to dance with death and make it look easy. The docking was perfect. Hull kissed the pier soft as a whisper, exactly where it needed to be, and Marcus shut down the engines with fingers that barely shook. For a moment he just sat there, hands still on the wheel, breathing hard, feeling more alive than he had since the day Devon Carter had looked at him with trust and asked what to do. Vanessa was crying. She stood, walked to his chair, put her hand on his shoulder with a gentleness that contradicted everything Marcus knew about her. That wasn't sailing. That was a miracle. It was physics. That's all. No, her voice broke. That was something I've never seen before, and I've sailed with the best captains in the world. She squeezed his shoulder, and Marcus felt something in his chest crack open, some part of him that had been sealed since Keisha died, recognizing that maybe, possibly, he was still capable of being the man his wife had married instead of the ghost he'd become. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." He nodded because speaking would have broken him. The ambulance came and took Vanessa toward whatever awaited her at the hospital. She'd asked him to come, but Marcus said no because that moment belonged to her family, not to the help who'd gotten her there. But she'd made him promise something before she left, leaning close in a way that suggested the barriers between CEO and employee had dissolved somewhere in the hurricane. "When this is over, we're going to talk. Really talk. About the yacht and you and everything that happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean you're not invisible anymore, Marcus Thompson. And I don't think you ever were." The hospital waited somewhere in the Nassau darkness. Marcus stood alone on the pier while the storm passed overhead, watching stars emerge from behind clearing clouds. He pulled out his phone, miraculously still functional despite the hurricane, and saw 3 missed calls from Mrs. Robinson. Before he could call back, she called again. "Marcus, thank God. I saw the weather reports. Are you safe?" "We made it. I'm fine. Isaiah's been asking about you all day. Won't believe me when I tell him you're okay. Can you put him on?" A rustle as the phone changed hands, and then Isaiah's voice, small and worried in a way that made Marcus's chest ache. "Dad? Hey, buddy. I'm safe." The boat ride was just longer than expected. "Mrs. Robinson said you sailed through a storm." "A real one. A pretty big one, yeah. Like the captains in the books? The hero ones?" Marcus closed his eyes, and for the first time in 5 years the answer came easy. "Yeah, buddy. Like those ones." Isaiah's voice brightened. "I knew it. I told Tommy at school you were a captain, but he said you just cleaned boats. I knew he was wrong." The weight of that simple faith hit Marcus harder than any wave. "We'll talk when I get home, okay?" "About all of it. You promise?" "I promise." After they said goodbye, Marcus stood on the pier for another 20 minutes, letting the enormity of what he'd done settle into his bones. He'd sailed again. Not just sailed, commanded, navigated, fought through conditions that would have broken lesser captains, and brought everyone home alive. Devon's ghost was still there in his head, but the question had changed. "What do we do, Commander?" had become something gentler, something that felt more like approval than accusation. Admiral William Sterling found Marcus in the hospital corridor at 2 in the morning. Marcus hadn't meant to stay this long, but exhaustion and adrenaline crash had left him too wrung out to navigate finding a hotel, so he'd claimed a chair in the waiting area and closed his eyes for what was supposed to be 10 minutes. The Admiral was 68, silver-haired, built like someone who'd spent 40 years commanding vessels and men with equal authority. He stopped in front of Marcus and studied him with eyes that had seen too many young sailors break under pressure. "Who are you?" Marcus stood, decades of military discipline making his posture snap straight despite exhaustion. "Marcus Thompson, sir. I brought your daughter here, through Hurricane Catherine." "Yes, sir." The Admiral's eyebrows rose fractionally. "What vessel?" "Aurora Majesty, your flagship. You captained that yacht in hurricane conditions." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Crosswind 60 knots, gusting higher. Wave height 40 feet, some larger." Something shifted in the Admiral's face, recognition dawning. "Where did you train?" "Coast Guard, sir. Cape Hatteras Station. 15 years, rescue operations." Hatteras, William Sterling's voice went quiet. "I lectured there in '09. Guest instructor for the Advanced Rescue Program." "I remember, sir. I was in that class. You read my manual 3 times. Marcus met the Admiral's eyes. "The chapter on storm navigation saved my life more than once." William Sterling almost smiled, and in that expression Marcus saw something he hadn't expected. Respect. "And now, you're captaining my daughter's yacht in a deckhand's uniform." "It's complicated, sir." "I imagine it is. Come with me." The Admiral led Marcus through antiseptic corridors to a cafeteria that was technically closed, but opened for the man whose donation had paid for the new cardiac wing. They sat with terrible coffee while Catherine Sterling slept upstairs, stable now, and Vanessa dozed in a chair beside her mother's bed. "You lost someone." "Coast Guard." The statement hit Marcus like a fist. "How did—" "I can see it in how you move, like you're carrying extra weight no one else can see." William Sterling's hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "I lost my executive officer in '92. Raymond Banks. Engine room fire on my destroyer. Ray saved 3 men but didn't save himself. I'm sorry, sir. The investigation cleared me. Equipment failure. Nothing I could have done differently. But I didn't sail for 2 years afterward because every time I touched a helm, I saw his face." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. What changed? His wife, Eleanor. 3 months after the funeral, she showed up at my door. I thought she'd come to blame me, scream at me, tell me I'd killed her husband. I was ready for it. Hell, I wanted it. What did she do? She hugged me. William Sterling's voice went rough. Told me Ray would be furious if I quit sailing. Said he'd haunt me for the rest of my life if I wasted the gift he saw in me. The parallel was so exact it felt like someone had reached into Marcus's life and pulled out the blueprint. My wife believed the same thing. Left me a letter before she died. Never opened it. Why not? Because I know what it says. That I should sail again, stop hiding, that our son needs to see his father whole. And I wasn't ready to hear it. Are you ready now? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Marcus couldn't fully process at 2 a.m, with exhaustion turning his thoughts to mud. I don't know, sir. But I'm here. That's something. It is. William Sterling stood, and something in his posture suggested this conversation was far from over. Get some rest, Captain. Tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like to show you something. What? The first vessel I sailed after Ray died. I keep her in the boathouse behind my house. Old Bertram, 31, nothing fancy, but she's where I learned that sailing isn't about forgetting the dead. He paused. It's about honoring them by being better than the grief that wants to drown us. Marcus returned to the yacht because hotels were expensive, and the Aurora Majesty had guest cabins nicer than anywhere he could afford. He fell into bed fully clothed and slept dreamlessly for the first time in 5 years. No nightmare at 3 a.m. No Devon asking questions Marcus couldn't answer. Just deep black sleep and the knowledge that he'd done something impossible and survived. Morning came with Nassau sun burning through the cabin porthole. Marcus woke disoriented, checking his phone to find dozens of messages. Mrs. Robinson updating him on Isaiah. Tom Morrison congratulating him on making headlines in the maritime press. And a text from Vanessa. Mom is stable. Surgery successful. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. My father wants to see you at 10. Don't make me order you to go. The Admiral's house sat on a bluff overlooking the harbor, all white stucco and tile floors and maritime memorabilia covering every wall. William Sterling answered the door himself, dressed in casual clothes that somehow still looked commanding. Coffee? Please. They drank it on the back patio, watching yachts move through water that sparkled like hammered silver. No hint of yesterday's violence except in the palm fronds still scattered across the yard. The Admiral studied Marcus with an intensity that suggested he was deciding something important. My daughter told me you have a son, 7 years old. Isaiah. Yes, sir. Does he know what you used to be? Marcus shook his head. He knows I work on boats, that's it, but he asks questions. All the time. Gets it from his mother. William Sterling smiled, and it was the first genuinely warm expression Marcus had seen from him. They always do. Vanessa asked questions constantly at that age, drove me half insane wanting to know how everything worked. Catherine said it was my fault for teaching her that the world could be understood if you were brave enough to look. Is that what you believe? That the world can be understood? No. William's expression turned serious, but I believe we have to try anyway. Come with me. The boathouse sat at the end of a weathered dock, paint peeling but structure solid. William pulled back the doors to reveal a vessel that looked older than Marcus. White hull with blue trim. The kind of boat that belonged in a museum instead of active service. Bertram. 31, 1978. Bought her the day after Ray's funeral. Why? Because I knew I had to get back on the water eventually, and I needed something that wouldn't let me hide behind technology. This boat doesn't have autopilot or GPS or any of the safety nets modern vessels provide. It's just you, the compass, and the sea. Marcus walked around the Bertram, noting how immaculately maintained she was despite her age. You said you didn't sail for 2 years, couldn't. Walked to the dock every day, sat in the captain's chair, then walked away because the idea of moving made me want to scream. But the boat was always here, patient, waiting for me to be ready. What made you ready? Time. Grief. Eleanor telling me that living half a life was worse than not living at all. William opened the cabin. Get in. Sir, if you can sail a $90 million yacht through a hurricane, you can handle this. And I think you need to. The Bertram's cabin was cramped, instruments analog and simple, everything reduced to basics. Marcus started the engine and felt it catch, rougher than the Aurora Majesty, but more immediate, more real. He released the lines and guided the boat out of the boathouse into open water, and something shifted in him that he couldn't name. How does it feel? Marcus couldn't answer because his throat had closed. The freedom of being on the water without the weight of rescue missions or dying wives or 5 years of grief pressing down on his shoulders. Just wind and waves and the steady thrum of an engine that didn't ask questions or demand explanations. First time I sailed after Ray, I cried for 20 minutes. William's voice was matter of fact. Just circled the harbor like an idiot, crying like I'd lost him all over again. But it was good crying, the kind that clears out poison. Marcus's vision blurred, and he didn't fight it. Let the tears come while the Bertram carved through Caribbean water under his hands. They sailed for an hour, William offering navigation suggestions occasionally, but mostly letting Marcus remember who he used to be before grief convinced him to become someone smaller. When they returned to the dock, William helped secure the lines with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. You're good at this. Not just competent, exceptional. Why waste that mopping floors? Because mopping floors doesn't kill anyone when you make a mistake. The words came out harder than Marcus intended, raw with 5 years of self-imposed punishment. William absorbed them without flinching. Devon Carter. That's his name, isn't it? The one you lost. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. And you think stopping sailing honors his memory somehow? Makes up for not saving him. I think... Marcus stopped, reconsidered. I think I'm terrified of being responsible for someone else's life. Every time I touch a helm, I hear him asking what to do, and I remember that I didn't have the answer. That my best wasn't good enough. William Sterling's expression turned fierce. Your best saved 127 people over 15 years. Your best brought my daughter through a hurricane that should have killed you both. Your best is better than most people's exceptional, and the only person who can't see that is you. That doesn't bring Devon back. No. Nothing brings back the dead. But hiding from who you are doesn't honor them either. It just adds one more casualty to their memory. You, half alive, pretending the ocean doesn't call to you every time you see it. The truth of that statement hit Marcus like a rogue wave. He sat down on the dock, exhausted and cracked open, while the Caribbean sun burned overhead and William Sterling stood beside him in patient silence. After a while, Marcus pulled out his phone. Mrs. Robinson, I need you to do something for in my bedroom. Top dresser drawer. There's a white envelope with my wife's handwriting on the front. Can you take a picture and send it to me? The pause on the other end carried weight. Of course, Marcus. Anything you need. The picture arrived 5 minutes later. Keisha's handwriting, blue ink on white paper. For Marcus, when you're ready. Marcus stared at it until the letters blurred. Don't open it. I'll read it when I get home. But thank you. Is everything okay? For the first time in a long time, I think it might be. He ended the call and looked at William Sterling, who'd given him privacy by walking down the dock to check the Bertram's mooring lines. Marcus stood and joined him, feeling lighter than he had in years. Your daughter said something yesterday about showing my son instead of explaining. She's smarter than I gave her credit for. William's voice carried approval. What are you going to show him? Marcus watched yachts move through the harbor, each one commanded by someone who'd chosen to sail despite the risks, who'd decided being alive was worth the possibility of being broken, that his father isn't invisible, that second chances are real, that the ocean is bigger than anyone's fear. And what are you going to do about Vanessa's job offer? Because there will be one. I guarantee it. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. They walked back to the house together, and Marcus felt something settle in his chest that had been loose and rattling for 5 years. The nightmare would probably still come at 3 a.m., and Devon's face would probably still ask questions Marcus couldn't fully answer, but maybe that was okay. Maybe grief didn't have to be something you escaped or conquered. Maybe it could just be something you carried while you kept sailing anyway. The voyage back to Chicago was different in ways Marcus couldn't fully articulate. Vanessa sat in the bridge beside him the entire time, not as passenger, but as something closer to crew, monitoring instruments with the competence her father had taught her decades ago. The water was calm, almost apologetic for the violence it had shown them 2 days earlier. Marcus kept checking the weather reports obsessively anyway, muscle memory from 15 years of learning that the ocean's moods could shift faster than human plans. You're different. Vanessa's observation came on the second day, somewhere between the Florida Keys and the Gulf Coast. Different how? Lighter, like you set something down. Maybe I did. Marcus made a minor correction to their heading. Your father mostly, and that Bertram. And just time, I guess. He's like that. Gets in your head and rearranges things until you can't remember why you thought the old way made sense. Is that why you haven't talked to him in 5 years? Vanessa's expression darkened. That's why I should have talked to him. He was right about some things, and I was too proud to admit it. They sailed in silence after that, and Marcus understood they were both carrying families that needed mending, relationships that had fractured under the weight of grief and pride and the particular stubbornness that convinced people being right was more important than being together. The parallel wasn't lost on him. How he'd stopped talking to Keisha's memory by refusing to read her letter, how Isaiah asked questions Marcus deflected because answering meant admitting he'd been hiding. The phone call came 12 hours out from Chicago, Vanessa's cell suddenly lighting up with a number that made her face go pale. She stepped away from the bridge to answer it, and Marcus gave her privacy by focusing on navigation charts that didn't need studying. When she returned, her expression carried the particular tension of someone who'd just received bad news dressed up as information. That was Victoria, VP of Operations. She knows about the crossing. Marcus kept his eyes forward. Word travels fast in maritime circles. She's been calling board members, trying to convince them that letting me put an unvetted captain in command was reckless endangerment of company assets. Vanessa's voice was tight. Says I exceeded my authority, violated insurance protocols, created liability that could cost Sterling millions if we'd had an accident. Did we have an accident? No. But Victoria operates on what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. She's building a case to have me removed as CEO. Marcus absorbed this, understanding that his decision to speak up on that dock had created consequences that rippled far beyond one successful voyage. Can she do that? With enough board support, yes. My father gave me controlling interest, but the bylaws allow for removal if I'm deemed unfit to lead. Vanessa leaned against the bulkhead. Recklessly endangering a $90 million asset qualifies. Then maybe you should fire me. Marcus's voice stayed level. Tell the board I misrepresented my qualifications, that you had no choice given the emergency, that it was a one-time exception that won't be repeated. Vanessa stared at him. You'd really do that? Take the blame so I keep my job? I've been blamed for worse things that weren't my fault. This actually is my fault, so it seems fair. Something shifted in Vanessa's expression, surprise giving way to something softer. No, I'm not throwing you under the yacht to save my career. We face this together, or we don't face it at all. The Chicago skyline appeared on the horizon at dawn, all steel and glass reflecting early light, familiar and strange after days on open water. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as they approached the marina. knowing that whatever waited there would determine whether the last 72 hours had been a beginning or just an aberration. Tom Morrison stood on the dock with arms crossed and the kind of smile that suggested vindication tasted sweet. "Heard you made quite an impression in Nassau." Tom's voice carried satisfaction as Marcus brought the Aurora Majesty alongside the pier with the same precision he'd used leaving. "Word is you sailed through conditions that scared off 8 other captains. Just did what needed doing." Victoria's losing her mind trying to figure out how a deckhand captained a yacht through a hurricane without getting everyone killed. Tom helped secure the mooring lines. "She's been in meetings with the board nonstop since you left." "What's she saying?" "That you got lucky. That Vanessa lost her judgment to panic. That the company will crash and burn if they give you a captain position permanently." He glanced at Vanessa, who was gathering her things from the bridge, but she made a mistake. "What's that?" "She made it public. Everyone in maritime press knows about the crossing now. Knows a former Coast Guard commander is working for Sterling. Knows Vanessa Sterling got her mother to surgery alive because you were brave enough to sail when no one else would." Tom's grin widened. Hard to spin that as reckless endangerment when the alternative was letting an old woman die. Marcus wanted to believe Tom was right, but he'd spent 3 years learning that rich people's problems followed different rules than normal ones. He thanked Tom and headed toward his car, exhausted and salted and ready to see Isaiah. Vanessa caught him at the parking lot entrance. "I meant what I said. About talking when this is over." Her voice was firm, despite the exhaustion evident in her posture. "Give me 2 days to handle the board, then meet me at the office. We discuss what happens next. I'm a deckhand with a high school diploma and some Coast Guard training. What exactly is there to discuss? How about the fact that you just did something 8 qualified captains refused to attempt, or that you navigated by dead reckoning through a Category 2 hurricane and made it look routine?" Vanessa stepped closer. "You're not a deckhand, Marcus. Stop pretending you are." The drive home took forever through morning traffic, giving Marcus too much time to think about what waited. Isaiah, who didn't know his father had sailed through a hurricane. Mrs. Robinson, who knew more than she'd said. The white envelope in the dresser drawer, Keisha's handwriting patient and waiting. The life Marcus had built from invisibility suddenly visible, exposed, demanding decisions he'd spent 5 years avoiding. Mrs. Robinson met him in the door with eyes that had been crying recently. She pulled him into a hug before he could speak, her arms surprisingly strong for someone 60-something. Isaiah saw the news. About the hurricane. About you. Marcus's chest tightened. What did he see? Everything. Maritime blogs picked up the story. Local news ran it because you're from Chicago. That boy knows his father is a hero now, Marcus. Question is whether you're ready to admit it. She released him and stepped back, collecting her things. He's been asking for you non-stop. Wouldn't believe me when I said you were safe until he heard your voice. Isaiah appeared in the hallway before Marcus could respond, 7 years old with eyes too wide and a tablet clutched in small hands. The screen showed a maritime news site, headline reading, "Former Coast Guard Commander Rescues CEO Through Hurricane." The captain who was hiding in plain sight. Dad. Isaiah's voice was small, confused, hurt in ways that broke something in Marcus's chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus knelt down, meeting his son at eye level, searching for words that would explain 5 years of grief and cowardice and self-imposed exile. "Because I was scared, buddy. Scared of sailing again. Scared of losing people I love. Scared of not being there for you if something went wrong. But you sailed anyway. To help that lady's mom." "I did. Tommy at school said you're lying. Said his dad checked and you're just a janitor pretending to be a captain." Isaiah's face crumpled. "He said people like us make up stories to feel important." The coded racism hit Marcus like a physical blow. The particular kind of prejudice that taught second graders to question whether black men could be heroes. He pulled Isaiah close, feeling his son's tears soak through his shirt. "Tommy's wrong, and so is his father. I was a captain. 15 years. Saved 127 people before I stopped. And yes, I cleaned boats for the last 3 years, but that doesn't make me less than anyone. Then why did you stop being a captain? Marcus took a breath deeper than any he'd taken navigating through the hurricane. Because someone died on my watch. A young man named Devon, who trusted me to keep him safe. And when I couldn't save him, I thought that meant I didn't deserve to be a captain anymore. Isaiah pulled back, studying his father's face with the brutal honesty only children possessed. But you saved the lady. And her mom. Doesn't that count? It counts. Marcus wiped his son's tears. You're right, it counts. And I'm done hiding. From you, from myself, from who I'm supposed to be. Does that mean you'll be a captain again? For real? I don't know yet. But I promise I'll figure it out and I won't lie to you about it anymore. Isaiah seemed to accept this, the way children do when they sense their parents are finally telling truth instead of comfortable fiction. Can you teach me? To sail like you? When you're older. When you're ready, Marcus ruffled his son's hair. But first I need to do something I should have done 3 years ago. The white envelope sat in the dresser drawer exactly where it had been every day for 3 years. Keisha's handwriting, as familiar as his own heartbeat. Marcus pulled it out with hands that barely trembled, carried it to the kitchen table after Isaiah went to bed, and opened it under the cheap fluorescent light that made everything look harsh and unforgiving. 3 pages in Keisha's neat teacher handwriting, blue ink on white paper, dated 2 weeks before she died. Marcus's vision blurred before he finished the first sentence. My love, if you're reading this, it means 2 things. First, that something has happened to me. Second, that you're finally ready to hear what I've been wanting to tell you for years. The letter outlined everything Marcus had been avoiding. How Keisha knew he blamed himself for Devon. How she'd watched him shrink into someone smaller than the man she'd married. How she'd spent her last months trying to figure out how to give him permission to live again after she was gone. Her words were precise and devastating, cutting through every excuse Marcus had built. You are not your worst moment. You are not the rescue that failed. You are not the man who couldn't save everyone. You are the man who held me when I cried. The man who stayed up all night with Isaiah when he was sick. The man who works a job he hates just to keep us safe. Marcus read the letter 3 times, and each reading stripped away another layer of the armor he'd built from grief and shame. By the 3rd reading, he understood what Keisha had been trying to tell him 3 years ago. That hiding wasn't healing. That becoming invisible didn't honor the dead. That Isaiah needed to see his father whole more than he needed his father safe. The postscript at the end nearly broke him. When you tell Isaiah about your sailing days, tell him I knew you'd find your way back. Tell him his daddy is a hero. Not because he never falls, but because he always gets back up. Marcus folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it on the dresser where he could see it every morning. Then he walked to Isaiah's room and stood in the doorway, watching his son sleep, the stuffed whale tucked under one arm, face peaceful in dreams that didn't know yet how complicated the world could be. Tomorrow he'd call Vanessa. Tomorrow he'd find out what happened with the board. Tomorrow he'd make decisions about futures instead of just surviving presents. But tonight, he let himself feel the weight of Keisha's words settling into his bones. The ocean is waiting for you, baby. And so is the life you deserve. The Sterling Maritime headquarters occupied 12 floors of glass and steel overlooking the Chicago River, the kind of building Marcus had walked past for 3 years without ever entering. He'd always used the service entrance at the marina, kept to the dock and the yacht and the spaces designated for people who cleaned instead of commanded. Walking through the main lobby in dress pants and a button-down shirt felt like transgressing boundaries he'd accepted as immutable. Vanessa's assistant met him at the elevator, a young man who looked at Marcus with curiosity rather than dismissal. Ms. Sterling is expecting you. Conference room on the 9th floor. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, expensive furniture that probably cost more than Marcus's annual salary, and attention so thick he could taste it. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, Admiral William Sterling to her right, and 3 board members Marcus didn't recognize arranged like judges at a trial. Victoria Ashford stood near the windows with arms crossed and an expression that promised this meeting would be unpleasant. "Captain Thompson." Vanessa's voice was professional, controlled. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Marcus took the chair indicated, hyper-aware of being the only black man in a room full of wealth and power, the only one who'd been mopping floors 2 weeks ago. The board members studied him with expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. Victoria spoke first, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Mr. Thompson, you represented yourself as qualified to captain the Aurora Majesty during a medical emergency. Can you explain what qualifications you possess beyond expired Coast Guard credentials?" "Lieutenant Commander, United States Coast Guard, retired." Marcus kept his voice level. 15 years active duty, 8 years at Cape Hatteras Station specializing in rescue operations, 437 missions, 127 lives saved, Master Mariner certification, advanced navigation, weather systems analysis, crisis management under extreme conditions, all of which ended 5 years ago when you left the service under circumstances you've declined to explain. Victoria's smile was predatory. "How do we know you're not a liability masquerading as competence?" "Because he brought my daughter and a $90 million yacht through conditions that scared off 8 other captains without a scratch on either." William Sterling's voice carried the kind of authority that ended arguments. "I've reviewed the weather data, the course he plotted, the decisions he made. It's textbook perfect, and I wrote the textbook." One of the board members cleared his throat. "Admiral, with respect, we're concerned about precedent. If we promote a deckhand to captain based on one emergency voyage, you're not promoting a deckhand." William cut him off. "You're hiring a decorated Coast Guard officer who has more experience in crisis navigation than anyone else in your employ. The fact that he's been cleaning your toilets for 3 years is your failure, not his." The room went silent. Victoria's face flushed red, but before she could respond, Vanessa pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. "I've prepared an offer. Chief Captain of Maritime Operations, reporting directly to me. Salary commensurate with experience, full benefits, company housing if needed." She looked at Marcus. "It's not charity. We need someone who can handle the difficult crossings other captains refuse, someone who can train our crew in advanced techniques, someone who won't panic when the technology fails." "This is absurd." Victoria's voice rose. "You're letting sentiment override business sense because he happened to be in the right place at the right time." "No, I'm letting results override prejudice." Vanessa's voice was ice. "Marcus Thompson did in 72 hours what nobody else could or would do. That's not sentiment. That's recognition of exceptional skill." The board members exchanged glances, and Marcus could see the calculation happening behind their eyes. Victoria was right about precedent. Promoting someone from the lowest position to the highest was unprecedented, would raise questions, might create problems with other employees. But Vanessa was also right about results, and results mattered more than protocol in companies built on maritime excellence. The eldest board member, 70s, with the kind of face that had weathered decades of difficult decisions, spoke carefully. "Mr. Thompson, if we offer this position, can you commit to it long-term? We can't afford to train someone just to have them leave in 6 months." Marcus thought about Isaiah, about the bills that never stopped coming, about 5 years of choosing safety over purpose. "I have a 7-year-old son. Everything I do is about giving him stability. If Sterling Maritime offers me a position that allows me to provide for him while doing work that matters, you'll have my commitment. And the circumstances that made you leave the Coast Guard?" Another board member. "Can you assure us those won't become our problem? I lost someone on a rescue mission." Marcus met each person's eyes in turn. "Equipment failure. Weather beyond prediction. Nothing I could have prevented. Investigation cleared me completely. But I couldn't sail anymore because every time I touched a helm, I heard him asking what to do. And I remembered that my best wasn't good enough." He paused, and the room stayed silent. 2 weeks ago, I sailed through a hurricane because someone needed help, and I realized something. Hiding from who you are doesn't honor the people you've lost. It just adds one more casualty to their memory. I'm done hiding. I'm ready to be who I'm supposed to be. And if that's not good enough for Sterling Maritime, I'll find somewhere else that values competence over comfort. The words hung in the air, more declaration than plea. Victoria looked like she wanted to argue, but William Sterling was nodding with satisfaction, and Vanessa's expression showed something close to pride. The board members conferred in whispers Marcus couldn't hear, and he sat there wondering if he'd just talked himself out of a job or into one. Finally, the eldest member spoke. We'll need you to complete recertification training, Level 5 simulation, updated maritime law, company protocols. Standard process usually takes 3 weeks. I can do it in 2. The man almost smiled. If you pass the Level 5 simulation on your first attempt, we'll make the position official immediately. Nobody's done that before. It's designed to break people. See how they handle failure. Then I'll be the first. Marcus stood, knowing the meeting was over. When do I start? Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Commander Sarah Chen will oversee your training. She's former Navy, doesn't suffer fools, and has a 90% failure rate. Vanessa's voice carried warning. Don't make me regret this. I won't. Marcus left the conference room feeling lighter and heavier simultaneously, aware that he'd just committed to something that would demand everything he'd been holding back for 5 years. Victoria caught him at the elevator, her expression venomous. You think you've won? Her voice was low enough that only Marcus could hear. But I know people like you. You'll fail the simulation, or you'll crack under real pressure, or you'll make some mistake that proves I was right. And when you do, I'll be there to remind Vanessa that mercy has consequences. Maybe. Marcus pressed the elevator button. Or maybe you're threatened because a black man who was invisible suddenly isn't, and that breaks your worldview too badly to accept. How dare! The elevator doors opened, and Marcus stepped inside without waiting for her response. The last thing he saw before the doors closed was Victoria's face, red with rage she couldn't express, without revealing exactly what motivated her. The training started at 6 a.m. sharp in Sterling Maritime's simulation facility, a building Marcus had walked past hundreds of times without entering. Commander Sarah Chen was 50-something, former Navy, with eyes that had seen too many young sailors think they were better than they were. She studied Marcus like he was a particularly interesting problem. Your Coast Guard record is impressive. 437 missions, 127 saves, distinguished service medals. But that was 5 years ago, and 5 years is forever in this business. I'm aware. The civilian procedures are different. More regulations, less autonomy, stricter liability protocols. You'll need to unlearn some Coast Guard habits and learn how we do things at Sterling. Understood. The Level 5 simulation has a 70% failure rate. Most captains need 10 attempts before they pass. I've never seen anyone succeed on their first try. Chen's expression was neutral. You understand what you're up against? I understand that 70% of captains aren't former Coast Guard rescue commanders who've navigated through actual hurricanes instead of simulated ones. Confidence is good. Arrogance kills people. Then let's see which one I've got. The first week was humbling. Marcus had forgotten how much he'd forgotten, how many skills had atrophied during 5 years of mopping floors. Simple procedures required conscious thought instead of flowing from muscle memory. His reaction times were slow, his instincts rusty, his confidence shaken by how much harder everything felt than it should. Chen was merciless in her assessments. You're thinking too much. Your hands know what to do, but your brain keeps interfering. Stop second-guessing and trust your training. I'm trying. Stop trying. Start doing. Vanessa appeared at the simulation facility on the 5th day, watching through the observation window as Marcus failed his 7th approach to a simulated dock. He saw her face through the glass, concerned, questioning, maybe regretting her decision to champion someone who was proving the critics right. That night, Marcus called Mrs. Robinson to check on Isaiah and heard his son's voice small and worried. Tommy's dad said, "You're going to fail." Said people like us don't become captains because we're not smart enough. The rage that flooded Marcus was cold and controlled, the kind of anger that burned hotter than explosion. He promised Isaiah he'd prove Tommy's father wrong, hung up, and returned to the simulation facility at midnight when it was empty. He ran scenarios until dawn, failing and adjusting and failing better, refusing to leave until his hands stopped shaking and his instincts started flowing. Chen found him there at 6 a.m., exhausted and salt-stained from 7 hours of simulated emergencies. "You planning to sleep?" "After I pass the level 5, that's not for another week. Then I'll sleep in 8 days. Something shifted in Chen's expression, respect replacing skepticism. "Your call, Captain, but pace yourself. Dead men don't pass certifications." The second week was better. Marcus stopped fighting his instincts, let muscle memory take over, trusted that 15 years of training couldn't be erased by 5 years of grief. The failures became less frequent, the recoveries smoother, and by day 12, Chen was nodding more than criticizing. "You're ready." Her assessment came on a Thursday morning. "Level 5 simulation tomorrow at 10. Board members will observe, Vanessa Sterling will be there, and if you fail, you're done. And if I pass, then you make maritime history and Victoria Ashford eats crow." Chen almost smiled. No pressure. Marcus spent that night with Isaiah, helping with homework and reading stories about whales, deliberately not thinking about the simulation. They made spaghetti together, and Isaiah chattered about school and science projects, and how he'd told Tommy that his dad was going to prove everyone wrong tomorrow. "What if I don't, buddy? What if I fail?" Isaiah looked at him seriously, gap-toothed and 7 and wiser than he should be. "Then you try again." That's what Mom would say. The observation room was crowded the next morning with board members and engineers and other captains who'd heard someone was attempting the level 5 on first try. Victoria stood in the back with arms crossed and an expression that promised vindication. Vanessa was there too, face calm but eyes betraying nerves. Chen reviewed the scenario one last time. Complete navigation system failure at open sea. No GPS, no radar, no electronic instruments. 30 minutes to navigate to safe harbor using only manual techniques. 70% of captains fail this, and the ones who pass usually have 10 attempts behind them. "This is your first. Any questions?" Marcus thought about Devin asking what to do, about Keisha's letter saying courage was moving forward despite fear, about Isaiah believing his father could do impossible things. "Why are you so calm?" "Because my son told me something. That I should sail for something, not away from it." Marcus climbed into the simulator. "I spent 5 years sailing away from grief. Time to sail toward who I'm supposed to be." The simulation began with normal operations, standard heading, everything green and stable. Then the master alarm screamed. Every screen went dark. Navigation died. Radar flatlined. Every electronic instrument failed simultaneously in the kind of cascade that separated good captains from great ones. Marcus killed the alarms and focused on what remained. Compass, paper charts, stars through simulated windows, instinct honed by 437 real emergencies instead of computer-generated ones. He plotted by hand, calculated drift mentally, estimated currents from wave patterns and wind direction. 20 minutes in, the simulated storm hit. Visibility dropped to nothing. The yacht bucked and rolled. Half the observation room thought he'd failed. But Marcus threaded the needle, navigating by feel and experience through conditions designed to be impossible. And at 27 minutes, he spotted the simulated lighthouse through rain. He guided the yacht through the channel with no instruments and brought her alongside the dock soft as a whisper. Simulation complete. Chen's voice over the intercom was professionally neutral, but Marcus caught the undertone of impressed disbelief. Time, 27 minutes. All parameters within tolerance. Pause. Simulation passed. The observation room erupted. Vanessa was crying. Tom Morrison, who'd snuck in to watch, was cheering. The board members were on their feet. Even some of the skeptical captains were applauding. Victoria walked out without a word, her face promising this wasn't over. Marcus climbed out of the simulator on shaking legs, and Chen met him with something close to a smile. In 30 years of running this facility, I've never seen anyone pass level 5 on first attempt. Whatever you've been through, it made you better than good. It made you exceptional. The celebration lasted until midnight at a bar near the marina, Tom buying rounds for anyone connected to Sterling Maritime, Vanessa making speeches about courage and second chances, half of Chicago's maritime industry showing up to see the legend who'd passed the impossible test. Marcus stayed for 2 hours before exhaustion and responsibility pulled him home, where Mrs. Robinson was waiting with Isaiah still awake despite the late hour. "Dad, did you do it?" Marcus scooped his son up, held him close, let the weight of the day dissolve into this moment. "I did, buddy. On the first try. Made history," I told Tommy. Isaiah's voice carried satisfaction. "He said his dad was wrong, that you're the smartest captain ever." "I don't know about smartest." Marcus set his son down, ruffled his hair. "But I know I'm done pretending to be less than I am. For you, for me, for your mom's memory. Can I tell Mrs. Patterson at school about you being a real captain? You can tell anyone you want." After Isaiah finally fell asleep, Marcus stood at the window overlooking the Chicago night. His phone buzzed, Vanessa's text. "Monaco Maritime Expo in 3 months. They want you to demonstrate the Sterling spiral. Think you're ready?" Marcus looked at Keisha's letter on the table, then at Isaiah's room where his son slept peacefully. He typed back, "I'm ready." The ocean had taken Devon. Cancer had taken Keisha. 5 years of grief had taken the man he used to be. But tomorrow he'd start building the man he was meant to become. Not invisible, not hiding, not sailing away from anything, sailing toward everything. He glanced at the photo on his dresser, Keisha laughing, her hand on his chest, before everything changed. She'd written that the ocean was bigger than his fear. He was starting to believe she was right. The ocean was bigger than anything that tried to make him small, bigger than the sky.